The first sound was not thunder. It was something older, deeper, like the groan of reality being forced to accommodate something it was never built to hold. High above the frozen mountains of Midgard, the sky tore open along a line that was not quite light and not quite shadow. The rift widened slowly, fighting the rules of this world with every inch, spilling out a radiance that made the sun seem like a pale imitation. Snow stopped falling. Wind hung motionless in the air like a held breath. Wolves in distant forests crouched low and whined, unsure whether to flee or hide. Even the world tree shuddered, its branches whispering with an unease that the Norns themselves could not fully name. The figure that stepped through the wound in the sky did not fall. He simply appeared as if the world adjusted itself around him. One moment there was nothing. The next, a towering form in gold stood upon a sheer cliff, the armor he wore humming with a power so dense it made the air ripple. Each plate of that armor was etched with sigils no god of this realm would recognize, marks born not of runes and sacrifice, but of science strained to breaking. His cloak moved though there was no wind. His face was carved from relentless will. His eyes, when they opened fully, were not just looking, they were measuring, dissecting, judging. The Emperor of mankind had arrived in a world that did not know his name. He let his senses spread out, not through the warp, but through the strange weave that underpinned this reality. No tides of raw chaos. No familiar psychic storms. Instead, there were threads, thick streams of power running along roots of a cosmic tree, rivers of belief circling around luminous nodes that felt like gods. Not the false gods of the warp, born entirely of thought and emotion, but something more intimately connected to the world's own bones. Power crystallized into personality. Storm and forest, fate and battle, death and rebirth. Crude, he murmured, though no sound left his lips. The thought simply existed, sharp and cold. But functional. Far below the cliff, a boy in furs nearly dropped the freshly carved runestone he carried. Atreus turned his head sharply toward the mountains, eyes narrowing as if he could see through snow, rock, and distance. Something pressed against his mind, not like the whispers he had known from prophecy or Jotun visions, but like a gaze that could cross entire realities and still remain focused. "Father," he called, tightening his grip on the bough slung over his shoulder. "Do you feel that?" Kratos did not answer immediately. He stood by the half-frozen river, hands resting on the haft of the Leviathan axe, eyes half-closed as if listening to something only he could hear. The ghost of Sparta had felt gods, titans, monsters, and the twisting touch of other realms. This was none of those things. It felt like standing in the shadow of a mountain that had decided, suddenly, to move. "Yes," he said at last. The word was low and controlled, but Atreus heard the tension inside it. Something new. On the cliff, the Emperor shifted his stance, boots digging into stone hard enough to leave hairline fractures. He inhaled once, not out of need but out of habit, a ritual reminder of the flesh he wore. Cold air bit at his exposed face. Snowflakes evaporated before touching his armor. Human life detected, he thought, his mind mapping the valley below in an instant. One signature was small but unusual, threaded with power that reminded him of half-finished work, part mortal, part something else. The other felt like stone sharpened into a blade and left in the fire too long, cracked, scarred, but unbroken. Both were dangerous in different ways, though neither could threaten him. Not by power. Perhaps, he conceded, by consequence. He stepped off the cliff. Gravity tried to claim him. He denied it. For a heartbeat, he simply walked through the air, letting the world adjust. Then he allowed himself to fall, but controlled, slow, as if the land rose up to meet him in respect. Snow exploded in a ring around his landing, but the ground did not break. It simply accepted the new weight. Atreus flinched as the distant shock rolled over the valley. Birds scattered from trees. The river broke its thin crust of ice in jagged patterns. Kratos turned toward the disturbance with the calm of someone who had stood before worse and still lived. "Stay close," he told his son. "I know," Atreus muttered, but he moved anyway, his feet automatically finding the pattern he had walked 100 times before, one pace behind and to the side of his father. The Emperor walked through the forest with unslowed, unhurried steps. Trees older than empires leaned away from him. Spirit lights flickered nervously in their hidden places. He observed everything. The runes carved into stones by human hands. The faint echo of magic in the air. The way the land itself seemed to remember violence. A primitive but actively maintained reality framework, he concluded. Localized divine infrastructure. Pantheon ecology stable but fragile. And I am an anomaly within it. He was not surprised when the first watcher approached him. Only mildly interested. The stag stepped into the path ahead, its antlers tangled with faint green light, eyes deep and knowing in a way that had nothing to do with animal instinct. It looked at him, and for a moment there was something like recognition. Not understanding, but a wordless realization that here was something that did not belong in any story this forest had ever told. "You are not of the 9 realms," said a voice that came from everywhere and nowhere. It was not speech. It was the impression of meaning layered into the air. The Emperor's gaze flicked upward, then sideways, then briefly closed. "The tree speaks," he observed. "Or something that believes it does. Fascinating." Before he could probe further, another presence cut across the realm like a knife. A specific, focused attention, sharp as a spear point. This was not the diffuse awareness of the world tree. This was someone looking. Heimdall tasted the disturbance like acid on the back of his tongue. His senses spanned all of creation as he knew it. Every breath, every whisper, every shifting grain of sand. But they skipped over this new glare of power like a stone bouncing on a lake. He could see the effect. Animals turning, snow freezing midair, magic trembling. But the source was wrong. Unfixed. "What in the Allfather's name are you?" he murmured, then rose from his watch. The Bifrost answered his call in a blaze of rainbow light. Down in the valley, Atreus stopped outright. "It's getting stronger," he said. Like when Odin was watching us before, but different. Less sneaky." Kratos grunted. "Gods?" he said simply. "More of them." The Emperor emerged from the trees into a clearing just as Heimdall descended in a crackling beam. Snow vaporized around the landing point. When the light faded, a god stood there wearing smugness like armor. His weapons glowed faintly. His smile was the kind that assumed victory before battle began. "You're a hard one to see," Heimdall said, head tilted. "You don't fit. That bothers me." "Your discomfort," the Emperor replied, his voice resonant but measured, "is not my concern." Heimdall's smile faltered for an instant. "Everyone is my concern," he said, recovering the tone. "It's my job. I see all threats to Asgard. I see them before they draw breath. But you?" He squinted, trying to look deeper into a place where depth did not mean anything. "You're just blank. You could cease attempting to comprehend what is beyond your capabilities," the Emperor said, "and restrict yourself to the question that actually matters." Heimdall raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" "Do you wish to speak?" the Emperor asked. "Or die?" Silence hung for the length of a heartbeat, and then Heimdall laughed, bright and sharp. "Oh, that's cute," he said. "Threats? In my realm? From someone who doesn't even have the courtesy to introduce himself properly." He drew his weapon, flipping it once in his hand. "Let me help you understand your place." He moved, and to any normal eye it would have been impossible to track. Heimdall stepped through space itself, flickering in and out of position. His strike aimed not just at the emperor's neck but at the precise point where the god had foreseen he would be. It had never failed him before. It failed now. The emperor did not dodge. He did not flinch. He did not even turn his head. The blade simply stopped. Not on armor, not on a shield, but on the invisible edge of a will that refused the idea of harm. Reality bent minutely around his hand as he caught the weapon between two fingers. Metal screamed as the concepts of motion, force, and cutting were rerouted, turned from something lethal into something trivial. Heimdall's eyes widened. The future had not shown him that. All paths he had seen ended with his weapon through this stranger's throat or heart. None had included humiliation. "This is the danger of believing you see everything," the emperor said quietly. "You forget that there are horizons." With a slight twist of his wrist, he tore the weapon out of Heimdall's grasp and snapped the blade like a twig. Shards of god-forged metal fell to the snow and hissed as if ashamed. Heimdall staggered back, eyes wide with something that looked uncomfortably like fear. "Impossible," he whispered. "Overused word," the emperor replied. "Usually by the unprepared." Heimdall lunged again, hands glowing as he called up raw magic, no longer relying on steel. Light crashed against the emperor's psychic aura and broke apart, scattering in aimless fragments. It was not a battle so much as a demonstration of mismatch. Far off, Atreus watched from the tree line, heart hammering. "That's Heimdall," he breathed. "And he's losing." Kratos said nothing. His jaw tightened. The stranger in gold did not move like a god. Gods in his experience wore arrogance like a cloak, but their power was wild, emotional, irrational even at its peak. This being's every motion was calculated, efficient. No wasted anger, no performance. Only intent. The emperor's hand closed around Heimdall's throat, lifting him from the ground as easily as a child might lift a stick. Power flickered across the god's form, but it found no leverage. "You are an observer," the emperor said. "Not a ruler, not a general. You see, but you do not truly understand. You misinterpret power as narrative instead of equation." Heimdall clawed at the golden fingers closing off his air. "You can't." "I can," the emperor said. "The question is whether I should." He viewed Heimdall's essence in a single clean look. Divine architecture woven from worship and responsibility, threads of duty anchoring him to Asgard's defenses. Removing him would be possible. It would also be noticed in a way that might complicate his objective. The emperor dropped him. Heimdall crashed to his knees in the snow, coughing, pride shredded worse than his throat. "Go," the emperor commanded. "Tell your king that something has entered his system that cannot be plotted on his board. Tell him he may speak to me as one ruler to another, or he may send more sons to die." Heimdall looked up, eyes burning with hatred. "You don't get to dictate terms in our realms." "You already know that I do," the emperor said, "because you have seen what happens if you pretend otherwise." Heimdall's mouth closed sharply. Rage battled with survival and, for once in his long existence, survival won. He vanished in a flare of the Bifrost. The clearing fell silent again. For a moment. Then the sky cracked with lightning. Thor did not bother with subtlety. He never had. Storm clouds burst into existence out of clear air, roiling and snarling with electric fury. The wind returned, not in whispers but in howls. Lightning coiled downward and struck the ground with the force of a mountain falling sideways. When the afterimage faded, Thor stood there, Mjolnir in his hand, eyes blazing. "I felt Heimdall choke," he growled, stepping forward. "I heard his fear. That was your doing." "Yes," the emperor said. Thor's lips pulled back from his teeth in something like a smile and something like a threat. "Good. Been wanting to punch that smug face for centuries. But you don't get to touch him and walk away. I had no intention of walking, the Emperor replied. Thor laughed once, short, delighted, reckless. Finally, he said, something interesting. He hurled Mjolnir. It did not fly. It tore through the air, dragging the storm with it, the hammer a condensed knot of rage, thunder, and godhood. The Emperor raised his hand and met it. This time the impact was not dismissed. He allowed it, absorbing the kinetic insult, letting it push him a half-step through the snow, boots carving twin furrows into the earth. Lightning arced across his armor, searching for weakness, finding none. The world around them paid the price. Trees shattered. Snow turned to steam. Atreus stumbled back with a shout, shielding his eyes. That, the Emperor thought, and allowed the slightest curve of interest to touch his lips, is more like it. Mjolnir snapped back to Thor's grip, humming with feedback. Thor rolled his shoulders. You took that better than a frost giant, he said. Let's see how you handle more. What followed was not graceful, was not pretty. It was raw force colliding with focused will. Thor moved like a storm-given flesh, each strike of his hammer rewriting the local weather, each step cracking stone. The Emperor met him with fists wrapped in psychic fire, each blow bending the air around it, every block not just resisting but analyzing. They traded strikes that would have erased mortal cities. Thunder clung to the edges of their conflict. The sky reeled. Atreus could barely track them, only seeing flashes of gold and red, trails of lightning and psychic glow. Kratos watched with the stillness of someone cataloging every weakness, every habit, every opening. He did not know the stranger in gold, but he knew patterns. The Emperor learned quickly. Thor relied on momentum, on chaining the weight of his hammer into whirlwinds of predictable chaos. So he began to break the rhythm. A half step back when the god expected resistance. A sudden surge forward when Thor braced to absorb impact. A twist of raw psychic pressure to the left just as Mjolnir returned to its master, shifting its path by one critical degree. Thor grunted as a golden fist drove into his ribs, divine flesh bruising with a crack that echoed across the valley. He spat blood, eyes flaring brighter. You hit harder than Jormungandr, he said, grinning. I like you. I am not here to be liked, the Emperor answered, driving another strike up toward Thor's jaw. The hammer intercepted it with a clang that rang like a struck bell across realities. And that, Thor said, straining against the impact, is your problem. He drew deeper on the storm, pulling lightning not just from the clouds above but from the very bones of the world. For a moment, the air itself became a weapon, every molecule charged, every breath a live wire. Atreus cried out and dropped to his knees, overwhelmed. Kratos moved without thought, shielding his son with his own body, muscles tensing against electricity that wanted to crawl under his skin and tear him apart from the inside. The Emperor felt the surge and adjusted. He did what he had done across 1,000 battlefronts, he changed the rules. His will folded a narrow corridor of reality around his mind and body, refusing the relationship between charge and matter in a localized field. Lightning struck him and then did not. Energy converted itself into harmless heat and bled away. Thor stared. You're cheating, he said. I am editing, the Emperor replied. Their next exchange ended differently. The Emperor allowed Thor's hammer to come dangerously close, close enough that the god's grin started to form. Then he stepped inside the swing with inhuman precision, hand shooting up to grasp Thor's wrist, the other crashing into his side. Psychic shock rippled through Thor's connection to the storm, briefly shorting it like a severed nerve. The god of thunder staggered, breath driven from his lungs. For the first time in centuries, he felt something like genuine physical vulnerability. He loved it. Before either could press the advantage, another presence flavored the air. It wasn't the sharp edge of Heimdall's scrutiny or the rolling pressure of Thor's storm. This was something layered, old, and bittersweet. The smell of wet earth and fresh flowers, the ache of loss, the whisper of battlefields long overgrown. "Enough," said Freya, stepping out from between the trees as if the forest itself had carried her there. Vines slid up from the ground, wrapping around the Emperor's ankles, testing the boundaries of what they could hold. They burned away in an instant under psychic fire. Freya did not flinch. Her eyes took him in fully, armor, bearing, presence, and something like recognition flickered there. "You are not of Odin's making," she said, "nor any realm I know. But you're anchored. Whatever you are not illusion." "Correct," the Emperor said simply. Thor wiped blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. "You're late," he told Freya. "You're impulsive," she answered. "As always." Atreus, still kneeling behind a fallen log with his father, whispered, "She came." Kratos watched Freya carefully. Their history was tangled, but he had come to trust her judgment more than most. If she chose to talk instead of strike, it was for a reason. Freya's gaze shifted to the trees. "You can stop hiding," she called. "There isn't a corner of this forest safe from what stands here." Kratos hesitated a fraction of a second, then rose, pulling Atreus up with him. They emerged into the clearing, the boy wide-eyed, the Spartan's expression carved from stone. The Emperor turned to face them fully. This, he realized, was the axis of this realm's disruption. The man was a blade honed on failure and rage, recast in reluctant restraint. The boy was a knot of futures. Chaos, peace, destruction, salvation, all braided into one uncertain thread. "You are the god killer," the Emperor said, recognizing Kratos not by name but by imprint. "And you are the boy touched by prophecy." Atreus stiffened. Kratos' hand tightened on the axe. "You know nothing of us," he said. "I know enough," the Emperor replied. "I can feel what the fabric of this reality does when you act. You are not the origin of its stories, but you have become their focal point." "And who are you?" Atreus asked before he could stop himself. The words slipped out, half curiosity, half defiance. The Golden Warrior regarded him for a moment. Most beings, mortal or divine, found their knees weakening under that focused attention. Atreus held it barely. "I am the Emperor of mankind," he said. "I have ruled longer than anyone here has names for. I was torn from my realm and cast into yours by forces I have not yet identified. I seek only to understand this universe sufficiently to leave it." "Only," Freya repeated dryly. "And in doing so, you've already strangled Heimdall and tried to break Thor in half." "He attacked first," the Emperor said. "As did the Watcher. I respond as required. That's exactly how this realm ended up soaked in blood the last time a stranger came claiming purpose," Freya replied, her gaze flicking briefly to Kratos. The Spartan's jaw clenched. He said nothing. The Emperor glanced at him. "You destroyed your pantheon," he said. "It wasn't a question. Not for conquest. For vengeance. For grief." The word landed like a thrown stone. Kratos' fingers dug into the leather of his weapon's grip. "I ended monsters," he said, "including the one I became. Yet you stand here ready to fight again," the Emperor observed. "Protecting your son from threats you cannot yet quantify. You have not left that life behind. You have merely redirected it." Atreus opened his mouth, then closed it, swallowing his protest. "It wasn't wrong. It just hurt." Thor snorted. "Are we going to stand around talking feelings, or are we going to finish hitting each other?" "No," Freya said sharply. "Not until Odin has at least heard of this properly. He will know by now, but he will twist what he is told unless we carry our own version." "He will twist it regardless," the Emperor said. "That is what tyrants do." Freya's eyes narrowed. "You speak as if you are not one." "Oh, I am," the Emperor replied without hesitation. The admission hung in the air, unexpected and heavy. "I rule 1,000,000 worlds with iron doctrine. I have crushed rebellions, erased cultures, burned planets to keep greater horrors at bay. By mortal definition, I am a tyrant. The difference between myself and your All-Father is not that I claim to be good. It is that I do not lie to myself about what I am. Silence pressed against the edges of the clearing. Atreus stared at him, stunned by the bluntness. Freya's lips parted, ready with a retort that didn't quite form. Even Thor, for all his bluster, took a half-second to process that kind of honesty. Kratos understood it immediately. It was the same cold clarity he had seen in his own reflection on the worst nights of his life. "You rule through fear," Kratos said. "I rule through necessity," the Emperor answered. "Fear is a tool, not an end." "And the people you rule?" Atreus asked. "Do they get to choose you?" "No," the Emperor said. "Choice is a luxury my realm cannot afford." "There it is," Freya murmured. "The same song, different melody. You speak of gods who play with lives as if they are pieces on a board," the Emperor said, turning to her. "I do not play. I calculate. Every atrocity I commit prevents a greater one. Every freedom I restrict denies chaos another foothold. I have seen what happens when no one holds the line. Everyone who's ever hurt someone believes they had a reason," Atreus said quietly. "That doesn't make it right." The Emperor looked at him. "You are young," he said. "One day you will learn that right is a word that collapses under certain scales. Survival does not ask if the method was pure, only if it was effective." "You sound like Odin," Kratos said. There was no accusation in his tone, only fact. The Emperor's gaze sharpened. "Do not confuse me with a creature who hides behind prophecy and half-truths," he said. "I do not scry the future in pools of magic and then fear what I see. I build futures through will and industry. If your All-Father and I share a resemblance, it is in ambition, not method." "He sees you as a threat already," Freya said. "He will either attempt to bind you or destroy you." "Let him try," Thor said eagerly. "No," Freya snapped. "If he miscalculates, the 9 realms will pay the price." The Emperor considered the paths spiraling out from this moment. His mind could not see the future the way the Norns did, but he understood probability on a scale that functioned as prophecy in all but name. Direct conflict now would destabilize a reality that was not his to waste. But he needed knowledge of the tree, of the realm gates, of the convergent point that had dragged him here. "I require access to your world's underlying infrastructure," he said. "The tree you all orbit intellectually, spiritually, physically. I need to examine it, to map it, to exploit the pathways you walk as myth." "You speak of Yggdrasil as if it's a machine," Freya said. "In some ways," the Emperor replied, "it is. Your runes, your rituals, they are crude instructions written into reality's operating layer. You hang yourselves from branches, tear out eyes, sacrifice precious things to buy understanding. My people would study it and rewrite its functions with more precision." "At what cost?" Kratos asked. "Always," the Emperor said, "at a cost. The question is whether the outcome justifies it." "And who decides that?" Atreus shot back. "I do," the Emperor said simply. "Then you are no different from the gods we've already killed," the boy said, voice shaking with anger. Kratos placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Atreus." "He's wrong," Atreus insisted, looking up at his father. "We've seen what happens when one person decides for everyone. Gods, kings, giants, the result is always the same. People suffer." "And what would you have instead?" the Emperor asked, genuinely curious. "Democracy? Consensus? Endless debate while enemies gather at your gates? I do not have the luxury of slow decisions. My enemies move quickly." "You are not in your realm anymore," Freya reminded him. "Here," You are just another power that has stumbled into something old and delicate. Not delicate, the Emperor corrected. Resilient in its way, but limited. Your All-Father has built a web of control from fear of prophecy that makes him brittle. Break the right thread and his entire structure shakes. You talk about him like you've known him for centuries, Thor muttered. Men like him, the Emperor said, are tragically common. A distant horn sounded, low and layered with magic. Heimdall's call. Summoning. Warning. Reporting. Odin knows, Freya said. He knew the moment the sky tore, the Emperor replied. He was simply waiting to see what shape I took. What will you do when he comes? Kratos asked. Speak, the Emperor said. Then judge. And if his judgment is to strike? Thor asked, eager again. Then I will demonstrate why I am not impressed by prophecy, the Emperor answered. Ravens appeared first. A handful, then dozens, then a whirling storm of black wings and harsh cries. They circled the clearing, each feather encoded with watching magic. Atreus shivered as he felt their eyes. The birds swarmed together and formed a rough humanoid silhouette. It sharpened, bones and flesh and cloth knitting themselves out of feather and shadow. When the transformation completed, Odin stood before them. His cloak fluttered in a wind no one else felt. His single eye gleamed with intelligence, suspicion, calculation, and an old, familiar fear, the fear of not knowing. You cause quite a mess for someone who claims to be accidental, Odin said, glancing at the broken trees, the scorched earth, Heimdall's bruises, Thor's bleeding lip. His gaze finally settled on the Emperor. You're not from here. That much is obvious. You shine like something that doesn't belong in my sky. I did not choose your sky, the Emperor replied. Odin smiled thinly. No, but you're in it all the same. I like to know what's in my sky. I am not in anything of yours, the Emperor said. I am in a reality whose current local administrator has confused stewardship with ownership. Thor snorted. Heimdall, pale and silent behind Odin, glared daggers. Freya crossed her arms, doing nothing to hide the faint smirk tugging at one corner of her mouth. You talk like a king, Odin said, or something very close to it. I am an emperor, the golden figure replied. Bigger crown then, Odin said lightly. You say you were dragged here. From where? A galaxy, the Emperor answered. Far beyond the reach of your tree. A place where gods are parasites born of thought and feeling, not pillars of reality. A place where humanity teeters on the brink of extinction every day and survives only because I refuse to let it die. You expect me to believe that? Odin asked. I do not particularly care what you believe, the Emperor said. Facts exist regardless of your acceptance. Odin murmured, pacing slowly around him like a wolf circling a larger predator. You toppled Heimdall. Fought Thor. Stood in my realm without collapsing under its rules. That alone makes you a threat. A variable, the Emperor said. Not inherently hostile. But I do not submit. And there it is, Odin said. We're at the interesting part. He stopped in front of the Emperor again. You want something. Nobody as big as you falls into a place like this without wanting something. Knowledge, the Emperor replied. Your tree. Your realm paths. The point of contact. Whatever tore a hole between my domain and yours. Once I understand it, I will leave. Your affairs do not concern me. And if I say no? Odin asked. Then you complicate a process that could be mutually beneficial, the Emperor said. And force me to acquire what I need, less gently. Less gently, Odin repeated. You come into my 9 realms, rearrange my watchman's understanding of fate, test my son, and now you threaten to dismantle my greatest asset if I don't hand you the keys? Yes, the emperor said. For a moment no one moved. Atreus could feel the tension like ice under his skin. Kratos shifted just enough to stand between Odin and his son, every muscle ready. Thor's fingers flexed around his hammer. Heimdall's nostrils flared. Freya watched them all, her expression tight with the understanding of just how little needed to go wrong for everything to break. Then Odin laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. It cracked along the edges, half amusement, half something brittle. "You're either the most arrogant being I've ever met," he said, "or the most honest. I'm not sure which bothers me more." "Honesty is cheap when you have the power to enforce it," the emperor replied. "Oh, see there," Odin said, pointing lazily at him. "That's the part that makes people hate you." "Hatred is irrelevant," the emperor said. "Survival is not. My people live because I did not care whether they liked me." "And now you're here," Odin said. "Far from them. Unable to protect them. Unable to rule them. Tell me, Emperor, what happens to your empire if you never return?" The question stabbed deeper than any spear. For a heartbeat, the golden mask cracked. Not visibly, but in the way his presence flickered. The warp, distant but faintly felt through whatever rift had pulled him, whispered with 1,000 possible futures without him. Holy Terra falling into civil chaos. Chaos gods spreading unchecked. Xenos empires advancing like rot. "Unacceptable," he said simply. Odin saw the weakness. He pressed. "You talk like duty is a straight line. But you're here. That line is broken. If I deny you what you want, you're stuck. Maybe you break some things, kill some gods, crack a realm. But you never get home. You never see your precious people again. And all your brutal little choices become nothing more than stories told in a universe that moved on without you." Kratos watched Odin closely. This was the All-Father at his purest. Not the raging king, not the wise wanderer, but the manipulator, weaponizing truth like poison. The emperor did not flinch. "You overestimate your leverage," he said. "I have built contingencies you cannot conceive of. Systems that can endure in my absence. My Imperium may suffer. It will not collapse." "But you don't know that," Odin said softly. "Not really. Uncertainty. That's what you hate. That's what terrifies you." Atreus recognized the tactic because he had been on the receiving end of it. Odin always sought the crack. The place where belief and doubt rubbed together. "You fear chaos," Odin continued. "I bathe in it. I've lived with prophecy all my life. Knowing and not knowing. Fighting what's written and watching it twist anyway. You and I were not so different." "We are," the emperor said, voice suddenly very quiet. "You chase knowledge to protect your power. I acquire knowledge to protect others from things worse than myself. You bind allies with tricks and curses. I bind them with fear and awe. One method is cowardly. The other is simply ugly." Odin's eye flared. "You dare?" "Yes," the emperor cut in. "I dare." Freya's hand flicked subtly, a warning motion. "Odin," she said, voice calm but edged. "Think. If you push this into open war, these lands will burn. Again. You barely survived the last apocalypse." "And you would advise him?" the emperor asked her. "I would advise this realm," she said. "And right now, that means talking before you both decide you're too proud to stop." Odin looked at her, then at Kratos, then at Atreus, then back at the emperor. Wisdom warred with paranoia in his single eye. "Fine," he said at last. "You want knowledge? You come to Asgard. Not as my subject. You wouldn't like that. As a guest." The word tasted wrong in his mouth. "You stand before the assembled gods and you tell them who you are. I show you a piece of what you want. And in return, you don't break my realms on your way out." "It's a trap," Atreus muttered under his breath. "All invitations to power are traps," the emperor replied. The question is whether one can walk into them and rearrange the jaws. You'll be surrounded, Kratos said. In his hall. His rules. Rules are suggestions, the emperor said. I have been rewriting them my entire existence. Perhaps, Odin said. But I know my house better than you. Come to Asgard, and you play my game whether you admit it or not. The emperor considered. He could attempt to force his way to the tree now, tear open realm gates, blast through defenses, treat Asgard like any other fortress. Would work. Eventually. The cost would be immense. Not to him. To the fabric of this reality. To the boy and the man whose story seemed intimately tangled with its continued existence. I accept your invitation, he said. Odin blinked. Just like that. You expected a speech? The emperor asked. I do not waste time when the path is clear. You offer knowledge in exchange for tolerable risk. I accept. But understand this, All-Father. I walk into your hall as an equal, not a defendant. If you attempt chains, literal or metaphorical, I will end your reign. Odin smiled, but there was no warmth in it. We'll see, he said. The ravens swarmed him again, ripping his form back into a cloud of black wings that scattered across the sky. Thor exhaled, some of the fight bleeding out of him. Well, he said. That was something. Heimdall glared at the emperor. I'll be watching you. You have already learned the limits of that claim, the emperor replied. Heimdall vanished with a twist of light, humiliated but not foolish enough to push further. Freya stepped closer to the golden figure. You just agreed to walk into the most dangerous place in all 9 realms, she said. With a man who would kill his own blood rather than lose control. I have dined with worse, the emperor said. Then you are more damaged than you sound, she replied. She turned to Kratos and Atreus. You two will not let him go alone. Atreus blinked. We won't. Freya's eyes softened when they rested on the boy. Odin will use him, she said. Or try to. If this emperor truly only wants to leave, that makes him the least dangerous new variable, for now. But if Odin twists him, if he binds him into one of his schemes, the consequences will fall on you and your son Kratos. They always do. Kratos knew she was right. He also knew that every step into Asgard was another step into the web he had spent so long trying to avoid. I will not serve him, he said. Then don't, Freya replied. Serve what you always have. The boy. Atreus began to protest, then stopped when he saw the look in his father's eye. It was the same look he'd seen when they walked toward Jotunheim, when they faced Baldur, when they chose to stand against Thor. A mixture of resignation and resolve. Fine, Atreus said. We go. But on our terms too. You have no terms, the emperor said. You have stakes. The distinction matters. Atreus scowled. You're really bad at making people feel better, you know that? I am not here to comfort, the emperor replied. Kratos stepped forward, standing now at the golden warrior's side. You say you have killed gods, he said. I have shattered entities your language has no words for, the emperor answered. And yet, Kratos said, you fear failing your people. The emperor's eyes flickered. I do not fear. I refuse it. Fear denied, Kratos said, is still fear. You speak as if you have solved such things, the emperor said. No, Kratos replied. I only learned to carry them honestly. For a heartbeat, the two of them stood there. 2 tyrants by necessity, 2 monsters by history, 2 protectors by choice, measuring each other across very different oceans of blood. Perhaps, the emperor said quietly, I will learn something useful from this realm after all. Just don't learn it too late, Freya said. The journey to Asgard began not with a rainbow bridge but with an older, hidden gate carved into the bones of the world. Freya led them to its mouth, her magic coaxing ancient runes awake as they walked. Atreus traced some of them with his fingers as they went, recognizing shapes from his Jotun heritage, others from spells they had barely survived. The Emperor studied each symbol with a different kind of attention. He did not see letters or prayers. He saw instructions, encoded manipulations of space-time, crude interfaces to a deeper system. In another life, with another focus, he would have loved to tear apart these runes and rewrite them in the language of the dark age of technology. Now he cataloged them as tools to be used once and discarded. As they paused before the gate, Atreus couldn't help asking, "If you don't make people choose you, if you don't let them vote or anything, do any of them love you?" The Emperor did not answer immediately. The truth of it cut deeper than any accusation. Billions worshipped him as a god he insisted he was not. Trillions feared him. Some revered him as the only barrier between them and obliteration. "Well, love is inefficient on that scale," he said at last. "It does nothing to stop a tyrannid hive fleet." Atreus frowned. "That's not an answer." "It is the only one I have," the Emperor replied. Kratos looked at the boy. "Love does not stop war," he said, "but it gives reason to fight it." "You rule no empire," the Emperor observed. "No," Kratos said. "Just one life. 2 if he ever listens." Atreus rolled his eyes, but his chest warmed despite himself. Freya's magic flared and the gate shimmered. Beyond it, Asgard waited, impossible sky, golden streets, halls built from vanity and victory. Odin's seat of power. The stage on which wars of words and worlds would be fought. The Emperor stepped forward without hesitation. Kratos followed, Atreus at his side. Freya remained at the threshold, bound by old curses and choices. Thor would arrive by his own path. Heimdall would watch, seething. As the gate closed behind them with a sound like a book slamming shut, the 9 realms held their breath again. A being who refused fate had entered a world built on it. A tyrant who admitted his tyranny walked into the hall of a god who dressed his own under layers of wisdom and sacrifice. A father who had killed a pantheon strode beside a ruler who had sacrificed half his sons to sustain an empire. Whatever came next would not be small. It would echo. Through halls. Through branches. Through stories. And somewhere deep in the roots of Yggdrasil, where no god's eyes could see and no rune could fully map, reality itself adjusted the tiniest fraction, making room for a new possibility. That even in the clash of monsters, something like understanding might briefly exist, before the world decided whether to break or bend.